There are times in human history when truth becomes a dangerous thing. When people choose silence over honesty because what they have seen is too terrifying to tell. This story belongs to that kind of time. It is not only a tale of a kingdom that rose and fell, but of the people who lived through darkness believing that they served light. Before we delve into these overlooked tales of endurance and pain, if you find yourself drawn to the hidden corners of history, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories like this. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. I am always amazed that we can explore these ancient narratives together, no matter where we are in the world, united by our curiosity about the past. Long before modern history began to write its pages, there was a land ruled by faith. Its kings were proud, its priests were powerful, and its people were afraid of the sky itself. Every thunder, every drought, every sickness was believed to be a message from the gods. And so they built temples so high that even clouds seemed to rest upon them. But those temples were not made for prayer. They were made for sacrifice. The kingdom was old and weary. The rivers had dried. The fields were empty. People cried for mercy, but the heavens remained silent. That silence became unbearable, and in that silence began a ritual that would change everything. Inside the grand temple, the air was filled with the smell of smoke and fear. The walls were covered with carvings of gods who looked down with cold stone eyes. The high priest stood before the altar. Around him, other priests chanted slowly. The people waited outside, staring at the temple door, praying for the sound of rain. The priest lifted the ancient blade. His hands trembled, but he did not stop. When the blade fell, the drums began to beat. The sound was deep and heavy, like the heartbeat of the earth. The people said that at that very moment, clouds began to form above the temple. And when the first drop of rain touched the ground, they believed their gods had returned. The kingdom rejoiced. They danced in the rain, forgetting the cries that had brought it. They said the gods were pleased. No one saw the faint red stain on the altar stone that would never wash away. Years passed. Every time the land grew dry, the people remembered the ritual. Each time another life was offered. Each time the rain returned. The priests became heroes. Their word became law. And soon even kings knelt before them. But then one day a stranger entered the city. He wore old robes and carried scrolls that no one could read. His eyes looked tired, as if he had seen too many worlds fall. He went to the temple and spoke to the high priest. His voice was calm but filled with warning. He said, "Every gift that you offer to the gods must one day be taken back." The high priest laughed. The stranger was thrown out of the city, but those words stayed behind. They echoed in the minds of the few who still feared what they had begun. Generations passed. The ritual became a tradition. The tradition became law. And the law became religion. Children were taught that the gods demanded loyalty through pain. No one questioned it. To doubt was a sin. To speak against it was death. The temple became the heart of the kingdom. And beneath it, in the silent chambers where torches never burned, something ancient began to stir. Something that had been sleeping since the first blood touched the stone. One night, under a red moon, the high priest entered the temple alone. He wanted to pray, but words refused to come. The eyes of the statues seemed to follow him as he knelt. The silence was deep, and then he heard it. A whisper came not from the heavens, but from beneath the floor. The whisper promised power, promised endless reign and endless rule, but it demanded something greater in return. When morning came, the priest was found lying before the altar. His eyes were open. His mouth was torn as if he had tried to swallow a scream. Yet outside, the people celebrated, because the rain had returned once again. They called it a miracle, but the rain did not stop. Fell for days, drowning the fields. Houses collapsed. Bodies floated in the streets. The people cried to the gods for mercy, but the gods were silent, and the rain kept falling. Still, the priests told them to pray. Still, they said, "The gods are testing us." And the people obeyed, even as their world was sinking. Faith is powerful, can save and it can destroy. That kingdom learned it too late. When the flood finally ended, there was nothing left but ruins. The temples had fallen. The priests had vanished. The statues had cracked open, as if something inside them had escaped. No one remembers the name of that kingdom anymore. Its story was buried under mud and time. But on nights when the rain falls without end, travelers say they can still hear drums in the distance. Slow, hollow, and filled with sorrow. Centuries passed. The kingdom that once ruled with faith became nothing more than a whisper among travelers and desert winds. Sand covered its temples. Vines grew through its streets. But some say the land itself never truly died. Beneath the silence, something still waited. Generations later, when new rulers rose in the neighboring lands, explorers began to hear strange stories. They spoke of a valley that swallowed sunlight even at noon. They spoke of ruins that seemed to breathe when the wind passed through them. And they spoke of a temple that refused to crumble, even though everything around it had turned to dust. At first, no one believed these tales. They sounded like superstitions told by frightened villagers. But then, a group of scholars, led by a man named Narration, decided to find the truth. He was not a priest. He did not believe in gods. He believed only in knowledge. Narration and his companions traveled for weeks through endless dunes and dry plains. The further they went, the quieter the world became. Even birds avoided that land. When they finally reached the valley, it was as if the air itself had forgotten how to move. At the center of that silent land stood the remains of the ancient city. Its gates were broken. Its houses were nothing but bones of stone. But the great temple stood tall, untouched by time. The carvings on its walls were still sharp, as if they had been made only yesterday. And on its altar, the black stain was still there. Narration felt a chill when he entered. The others hesitated at the door, but he stepped forward with his torch. The flame trembled, though there was no wind. He looked around and saw carvings of faces twisted in agony, arms raised toward a sky that had never answered. As he explored the inner chamber, he found something carved deep into the stone, a language older than any he had ever seen. He could not read it fully, but one line repeated again and again. It said, "They promised rain. They took the world." Those words followed him in his dreams that night. He saw images he could not explain. Faces half human and half shadow, rivers of blood flowing upward into a sky without stars. He woke drenched in sweat, hearing the faint sound of drums somewhere deep below the earth. The next morning, one of his men was missing. They searched the ruins, calling his name, but found only footprints leading into the temple's lower passage. No one wanted to go down there, but Narration refused to leave without answers. He took a torch and descended the stone steps alone. The air grew heavy as he went deeper. Each step echoed like a heartbeat. At the bottom, he found a vast chamber, and in the center of that chamber stood a pool of dark water. Its surface was perfectly still, but it reflected light as if it were alive. When he leaned closer, he saw not his reflection, but faces, many faces, turning toward him. They looked like the people from the carvings. Their mouths were open, moving silently, as if they were still praying. He stepped back in horror, and the torchlight flickered. From the darkness beyond the pool came a voice. It was not loud, but it carried weight. It said, "You have come too far." Ariston froze. The voice sounded human, yet older than any human could be. He tried to speak, but the air around him thickened. The water began to ripple. From its center, something began to rise. Something tall, thin, and shimmering like heat on stone. It had no clear face, but its presence filled the entire chamber. He dropped the torch. The flame hit the ground and died. In that darkness, he felt the same whisper that the old priest had once heard, soft, patient, and hungry. When the others finally gathered enough courage to follow him down, they found only the torch lying beside the black pool. There was no sign of Ariston. The water was calm again, as if nothing had happened. They fled the valley before nightfall, leaving everything behind. But as they rode through the desert, the sky darkened and rain began to fall. Rain in a place where it had not rained for 1,000 years. The world forgot about Ariston and his lost expedition. But a few decades later, strange things began to happen across nearby lands. Rivers changed their course. Crops rotted under sudden storms. Villages disappeared overnight, swallowed by mud. And in every place where the flood struck, people reported hearing the sound of drums in the distance. Slow, deep, and wet. Scholars called it coincidence. Priests called it punishment. But the old stories said something else. They said the gods had awakened again. And this time they would not wait to be worshipped. Far away, in a monastery built on the edge of a mountain, an aged monk studied Ariston's last notes, which had somehow been found near the valley. In those torn pages, he read a final line written in trembling ink. It said, "The gods are not what we made them. They are what we became." The monk wept that night. He burned the notes and swore never to speak of them again. But the wind carried the ashes across the desert, back toward the valley where the temple still stood. And when the moon rose over those ruins, the carvings on the temple walls seemed to move again, their eyes gleaming in the silver light, their mouths half open, as if whispering to the rain. The valley slept for centuries. The temple stood untouched, defying time as sandstorms came and went. Its stones grew darker, its carvings deeper, as if each passing year only strengthened its heartbeat beneath the earth. Then one day silence broke again. It began not with thunder, but with machines. Engines roared across the desert. Bright lights pierced the darkness where only the moon had ruled for thousands of years. A new expedition had arrived, scientists, journalists, archaeologists. They carried drones, cameras, and modern faith in technology. They had come to uncover what the ancients had left behind. At the head of this mission was Dr. Ilara Miles, a historian known for her obsession with forgotten civilizations. To her, myths were not lies. They were coded truths, written by frightened eyes that had seen what the future could not understand. For months, she had studied the few remaining fragments of Ariston's journals, fragments that scholars had declared false. But Ilara saw patterns in his madness, his drawings of the black pool, his descriptions of the voice beneath the world, his final words, "The gods are what we became." She needed to see the valley for herself. When her team reached the ruins, the desert was unusually cold. The air shimmered as if the ground was breathing. Locals had warned her not to go there. They said the valley consumed those who entered, that even the stars refused to look down upon it. But Ilara did not believe in curses. She believed in proof. The temple still stood as Ariston had seen it, its walls sharp and alive, its shadow stretching unnaturally long. When the team stepped inside, The echo of their footsteps rolled endlessly, as though the walls were deeper than they appeared. The carvings were the same, faces of agony, arms raised to an invisible sky. One of the crew members, Daniel, touched the altar. "It is warm," he whispered. No one understood why. The air was freezing, but the stone pulsed faintly, like a living vein. Alara ordered cameras to be set up. Every corner of the temple was scanned and documented. They found the staircase leading down the same path Aristion had taken centuries ago. Alara decided they would open it the next morning, after setting up equipment for live recording. That night, the wind changed. It howled through the ruins like a voice trying to form words. The team could not sleep. Some heard whispers outside their tents. Others saw movements in the sand, shapes without footsteps. At midnight, Daniel screamed. Alara ran out to find him standing near the temple, staring into the darkness. His eyes were unfocused. He was whispering something over and over again. When she reached him, he turned slowly and said, "They are not gone. They never were." Before anyone could move, the ground beneath them shuddered. A deep tremor rose from below, like something enormous shifting in its sleep. The sand rippled outward, circling the temple. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The night fell silent again, so silent that Alara could hear her own heartbeat echo against the stone walls. The next morning, Daniel was gone. His footprints led into the staircase. Alara hesitated, but this was the moment she had come for. She and two others descended into the darkness, their flashlights cutting through centuries of untouched air. The steps seemed endless. The deeper they went, the more distorted the air became, warped, as if reality was bending around them. Finally, they reached the chamber. The black pool was still there, perfectly calm, perfectly waiting. Alara approached it with trembling hands. Her reflection wavered, then shifted. Her face disappeared, replaced by another. A woman, ancient and fierce, with eyes that burned like dying stars. Then more faces appeared, hundreds of them, whispering soundlessly in the rippling surface. The voice came again. "You have come too far." The flashlight in her hand flickered. The air thickened. She felt the pressure of unseen eyes pressing against her skin. The water began to rise slowly, forming a thin column that reached toward her. It shimmered, translucent, like a living shadow. Her colleagues ran, but Alara did not move. Her expression changed, not fear, but recognition. She whispered softly, "I understand now." The water touched her hand, and in that instant, the entire chamber blazed with light. Not bright, but dark light, like a negative of reality. The carvings on the walls began to glow. The faces twisted, opening their mouths in silent screams. Then silence again. When the others returned with help, they found the chamber empty. Only the camera remained, its lens shattered, still recording. The last frame showed Alara standing at the center of the room, her eyes glowing faintly as the water rose around her. She was never seen again. Weeks later, strange phenomena spread across the world. Rain fell in deserts. Oceans receded without reason. Storms moved against the wind. And everywhere, there were reports of voices beneath the rain, soft, rhythmic, ancient. Governments called it climate disorder. Scientists called it magnetic interference. But those who had seen the footage from Alara's expedition called it something else. They said the gods had returned, not as beings of worship, but as memory made flesh. The temple had been sealed again by a sandstorm soon after. No one dared to reopen it. Yet, sometimes at night, satellites still capture faint lights flickering from beneath the desert surface. lights that pulse in rhythm like a heartbeat, the same rhythm heard in the rains across the world, the same rhythm Ariston once wrote about, the same rhythm that had waited centuries to be remembered. The narrator's voice softens. Perhaps, he says, the gods never left. Perhaps they were never gods at all, but reflections of us. Our fears, our hunger, our endless need to be remembered. He pauses. The sound of rain fills the background, steady and heavy. When civilizations rise again, they will find our cities buried beneath the same sands. They will read our words, our warnings, and think them myths. And maybe, when they dig too deep, they will hear it too, the whisper beneath the world. The screen fades to black. Only the sound remains, a slow, echoing drum, beating like the heart of the earth itself.